Hey guys, today is like any other day, it's Sunday. And I say Sunday, they say God rested on Sunday after he made the mountains and the sea below. But we know scientifically that's impossible, right? And we offer the theory of revolution that how we're talking about the magma and how the earth crust is evaluated and deep exploration. You know what I'm talking about? But in the same context, I'm gonna go talk about subject matter that is close to home, right? For example, we know the cultural impact that we have Western civilization. It's not a contusion that people have to get knocked in the head to remind. But when we're talking about example, the NATO obligation and arms reserves, right? And some people's stipulation, right? So if I want to go here and I said, um, what nationality do you culture appropriate to your background, right? And some people might say they're Turkish, Armenian, Russian, right? And then we're asking about those countries, for example, who are on their radar, opposed to the enemy of this, not the state, because we know where the United States did. So when we're talking obligation NATO with the reservists, we have a whole cultural impact. You might have people from those regions who might be Iraqis, who might more have inclinations for their plight than someone in the United States, for example, who would need NATO and NORAD, including NATO obligations. So then we're talking about Ukraine, and they're not NATO obligated, and they're not, right? So when you had that capitulation, and then you're angering other nations who are answering the same question. So you don't call it sympathy, right? As a politician, as a diplomat, is to abide by all sides with all treaties set forth, right? So you work with those nations. It's easier to flabbergast it and also to inflate it. But when we ask these questions, we're asking the doctrine, for example, what happened in Iraq. And again, you might have someone have more views towards Israelis because you know what is happening with the U.S. and Biden's decision. Now, I can actually, for example, try to articulate Ukraine's position and our reservists here, and then you conflict on people's sovereignty, right? So, you know, when we have visitors from the United States, of course, they're going to think of their own nationality and not abide by me. They would try to step on me, as you know, as has happened. They could control your finances, your employment, and when we're talking about McCarthyism era, what happened after surrender of Japan, we knew what happened in Hollywood, right? So when we're asking these questions, it's compounded now, right? But, you know, again, you know, I talked about contingencies that you talk about the United States when we're talking about culture appropriate to their city. So when you look at Democrats versus the Republicans, you have a balance, right? And at this time, the resources are all weighing what the Biden administration. And at the same time, and what you're talking about encroachment, right? And then you're asking these same questions that are pertaining to peace. Now, when police, or when we decided to use Americans as its echelon, right, for its own decree, to make sure that the U.S. obligation to keep the peace in those shipping routes would abide all sides, right? But unfortunately, what we have in those regions and the obligations of those routes in those countries, for example, like Turkey, talking about their embargo they're having with Israel, right? Because it's too close to the region and the turmoil that is evidential before the U.S. positioning to go in to Iraq in 2002. Even though the 9/11 was perpetrated by stunts, by means that really was artifice of the beckon on after what could happen. But it wasn't a clear, objective manner of one nation, one country. It was over the predominance of the evidence that's before the world courts. And those evidence always pertain to the artifacts before the treaties that were signed. But when you decided to tear up treaties that were binding, and previous to this administration, 4 years ago, and 4 years before that, for the infractions they caused, which are free trade, We depend on our commerce, and we have plenty of business. And the more that they infracture government participation to make businesses like this survive, so they can have this equitable treatment of trade. It should always abide. Because growing up, we always ask these same questions when we have a treaty or a signed free trade agreement. And this way, Bram Mulroney tried to express that. So it took many, many years to put certain items that didn't infracture the cost of fabric, right? So when we ask these questions, these are always the same question repeated. But unfortunately, the liberal policies have failed for the economic standards to equate the failure of their policies. Now, I can argue about American politics, but I can't say for sure how they're using their ideas as, for example, if you're facing criminal, punitive, or when it comes to legislation bills and articles that they would pass, and it runs from state to state. But, it's also concerning, as I said. So you can't make everybody happy. You only make some people happy at the exact same time. So when I'm asking certain questions, if I, for example, understand the plight of the Eastern Bloc before the wall was and after it came down, and then we can make comparison, but it doesn't make me objectified to be talking as a historian, because anyone could see the light of way when you're asking about, for example, what happened with the oil embargo with South America. Chavez, when he was in there in the country, they were arguing that oil was, dirt cheap, and they could produce amount of it, but we invest also what the environmental impact was after the United States dried up their own wells in Texas, and what happened after that. So when we're asking questions like this, they're persistent. It goes to Iran too. They're oil rich, and they're set on embargo, and that would instruct the way that they want to help those less impoverished. Same with Russia. They understand these countries, like, for example, Sri Lanka. They have rickshaws like they would have rickshaws in India. They need to make sure that fuel is according to, they can have their markets fed to the ones that can afford it, right? So this is, again, the questions when we're talking about also fission and also nuclear reactors that are now being built, and they're in certain places around the world. We know there are containment, like smaller dispersed nuclear powered facilities to run your resources, but if there are technical covert actions, and there's some things that are before CSIS that would be make it more prone to attack from. This is what we're arguing about. So Canada is standing clear in its objective and its diplomacy going forward. This is Ajdan Karadin signing out.